war and the carnage that has exposed the depths of man's cruelty to men, millions of people in the Middle East and elsewhere are fleeing across international borders on a scale reminiscent of the Second World War. The numbers crossing the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea to reach Europe, despite the attendant risks, are staggering. The refugee problem facing Europe today will test the limits of the continent's resolve and generosity. Parallel to the migration crisis is the phenomenon of terrorism. Terrorism has increased worldwide, and it has become more brazen and lethal than before. Terrorist networks are expanding across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Even as we remain vigilant against the threat of terrorism, we must move beyond a mindset that this menace can be defeated by force of arms alone. We may strike blows against terrorist networks, but if we ignore the fact that political instability and religious and other forms of intolerance fuel extremism, our efforts to root out this menace will be futile. Mr. President, climate change is a major challenge facing the world today, and unless it is addressed effectively, it will continue to rewrite the global equation for development, peace, and prosperity. We should not let the window of opportunity that will be presented by the Paris Climate Change Conference close without collectively committing to action-oriented solutions that can significantly contribute to reducing emissions. The Paris negotiations should be guided by the spirit of frankness, mutual understanding, and the willingness to compromise. Mr. President, the Doha Development Agenda is an issue of importance to developing countries like mine, which deserve emphasis at every available opportunity. We strongly believe that a well-functioning, rules-based multilateral trading system is in our interest. The bilateral arrangements that we are negotiating should follow the preferences and flexibilities accorded to WTO member states within the multilateral trading system. We therefore make a strong call for the Doha Development Agenda to quickly conclude according to its mandate and fully develop its development objectives. Equally important is the need to acknowledge that we will never achieve real development if some sectors of society continue to be marginalized. The role of children and women, as well as other disadvantaged groups in our communities in advancing the global development agenda, must be further enhanced. As we celebrate the 20th anniversary of the World Programme of Action for Youth this year, through which the United Nations strengthened its commitment to improving the lives of young people, let us resolve to adequately address the development needs and aspirations of young people with more vigor. The 70th anniversary of the UN offers a unique opportunity to appeal to the Security Council not to use the International Criminal Court in pursuit of the interests of its powerful members. we must acknowledge that in its present form and configuration, it will be an uphill battle for the Security Council to take our concerns on board. The call for the Council to be more transparent, inclusive, and democratic needs to be echoed with even more vigor and clarity. A reformed United Nations Security Council that is in line with the 21st century geopolitical realities is one that will be reconstructed in accordance with the Ezulwini Consensus and Sirte Declaration. A Security Council that has the voice of Africa and other marginalized regions in the permanent category will increasingly acquire legitimacy and unconditional acceptance of its decisions. Mr. President, we must continue to pursue a joint and consensual approach in tackling our challenges, taking decisions collectively and sharing responsibilities. The General Assembly, in whose name the UN was created, is most suited to fulfill that task. It has continued to serve as the principal policy-making, deliberative, and most representative organ of the UN. It is the only platform on which all countries, big and small, can engage in face-to-face negotiations as sovereign equals to seek solutions to the problems facing humanity. The process of revitalization of the General Assembly must be hastened. The resolutions of this principal organ of the UN should no longer be regarded as mere recommendations that can be casually ignored. The need for manifestation of a universal commitment to the principles upon which the UN is based cannot be overemphasized. However, the United Nations is much more than a peacekeeper and a forum for conflict resolution. The UN and its family of agencies are engaged in a vast array of activities that seek to address challenges hindering progress in the improvement of people's lives around the world. As indicated earlier, today's challenges include, amongst others, climate change, food shortages, HIV and AIDS, financial crises, extreme poverty, population growth, urbanization, conflicts, terrorism, and mass migration. The common purpose and most complex task within the United Nations family is finding practical and lasting solutions to all these problems. For our part, Lesotho has initiated an innovative indigenous consultative process which seeks to galvanize the collective wisdom and energy of leadership at all levels of society, from His Majesty all the way down to local leaders, with the sole purpose to intensify the fight against HIV and AIDS. This consultative process will ensure ownership and accountability of the leadership in all health service delivery processes. We see great wisdom in redefining the rollout of primary health care, utilizing existing community-based leadership structures in an effort to realize the goal of health for all by the year 2030. This comprehensive rollout agenda has all the ingredients so ably articulated in Goal 3 of the SDGs. His Majesty is expected to launch this initiative this month. As we continue to ponder the most pressing issues and challenges facing the international community today, we should not forget the plight of the Sahrawi and the Palestinian peoples. Both the General Assembly and the Security Council have recognized the inalienable right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination and independence. We support the call for the resumption of direct negotiations between the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic and the Kingdom of Morocco on equal footing and without any preconditions. Lesotho continues to fully support the Palestinian people in their decades-long struggle against Israeli occupation and oppression. Peace between Israel and Palestine is an essential cornerstone in the architecture of a comprehensive Middle East peace, a peace that will unlock the creative genius and entrepreneurship of the region. By the same token, we applaud the current initiatives to normalize relations between Cuba and the United States of America and urge that the unilateral sanctions on Cuba be removed sooner than later. Mr. President, however much the world may have changed since 1945, the United Nations remains the only universal intergovernmental institution that unites us in a global community of sovereign states. Yes, the organization may have its shortcomings, but it remains a bastion of hope for humanity. Indeed, the President of the 67th session of the General Assembly correctly made the following observation, and I quote, "Yet for all its imperfections, which are inherent in any institution shaped by human mind, the UN remains critical to addressing the growing needs of mankind. One cannot simply imagine a world in which peace and the dignity of all could flourish without the United Nations," unquote. I cannot agree more with him. The responsibility to make the UN function optimally reposes squarely on all of us. Our shared vision and objectives require much more than the reaffirmation of our commitment to the founding principles of the United Nations. Increased political will is a necessary ingredient for the achievement of the ideals that underpin the UN Charter. We look forward to a rebirth and injection of fresh energy into the UN system so that the next 70 years will be a period of even greater achievement and success for the organization. The obligation which the founding members of the UN handed down to us must continue to be carried out with a solemn sense of responsibility by all. I thank you for your attention.
On behalf of General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Lesotho for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear a statement by His Excellency Irakli Garibashvili, Prime Minister of Georgia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have a great pleasure in welcoming the Prime Minister of Georgia, His Excellency Irakli Garibashvili. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, Your Excellencies, it is a great honor to once again address the General Assembly as we mark the 70th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. This occasion provides an opportunity to reflect on our accomplishments and also recognize the challenges that remain in achieving peace, security, and human rights at home and abroad. My friends, Georgia is a small country with a big heart and even bigger dreams. Georgia is in the move and headed in the right direction. Our vision is clear and our future is bright. In a major announcement this week, the World Bank released its comprehensive new report on governance, and I'm very proud to say that Georgia was at the top of the charts in overall progress in all 6 measures. According to the rankings, since 2012, Georgia jumped 13 places in regulatory quality, 16 places voice and accountability, 19 places in rule of law, 22 places in political stability and government effectiveness, and 23 places in control of corruption. This dramatic progress underscores the determination of my government to strengthen the rule of law and media freedom, build a modern economy, and move our nation forward with confidence. And by contrast, just 2 decades ago, Georgia was an isolated country, torn by a civil war with few functioning institutions of modern statehood. Today, we are writing a new chapter in the history of our great nation. Georgia is a modern, dynamic, and democratic state. Next year, we will celebrate the 25th anniversary of Georgia regaining its independence. Freedom, fairness, and justice, as we say, run through the veins of our people. The Georgian people are committed to the rule of law, the protection of human rights, and democratic values. We will stay the course on reform, which is the only road to peace and prosperity of our country. And we're moving our country forward with the same spirit that our ancestors embodied for thousands of years. My country has absorbed the principles of the UN Charter. These principles have guided our democratic development. We learned quickly and embraced passionately the spirit of international cooperation. So on behalf of all freedom-loving Georgians, I thank the United Nations and all free people around the world for your steadfast support of my country. Today, Georgia is firmly connected to the world and the family of nations. We have dedicated ourselves to democracy, human rights, sustainable development, and the promise of peace. We're building a mature democracy and a job-creating economy, even in the face of significant regional security threats. The steady arc of our Euro-Atlantic path reflects Georgia's strong European identity and values. European integration has proved to be a powerful incentive for calm cooperation among European states and their neighbors. We reached a milestone in June 2014 when I signed the association agreement with the European Union. As part of Europe, Georgia will become part of this fabric of peace and stability, which can only benefit our own neighbors, and I think it will make us more secure. In the last few years, my government and our country has made progress in every policy area. We have established a social compact that rewards work and enterprise while providing a social safety net for those in need. Despite challenging economic headwinds, we have introduced a national health care program and doubled welfare services. In just one important initiative, we will save over 200,000 lives through a new and creative campaign to combat hepatitis C. And we are solidifying Georgia's democracy. Our people demand and deserve a strong democracy and a responsive government. We have created a system of governance that is more open, more transparent, and more accountable to the people than ever before. But we will not rest. More must be done. The 2013 presidential election and the 2014 local elections were praised by international observers as free and fair. I'm also proud of the fact that last year we adopted Georgia's first comprehensive long-term human rights strategy and enacted a new anti-discrimination law. So my government strives to ensure human rights for all of our people. And hand in hand with a free and open democracy is a free and open marketplace. Economic freedom remains the central pillar of our development plan. And our plan is designed to grow our economy. It's to strengthen our institutions of governance and deliver more jobs and more opportunities for Georgian people. We're driving growth by making Georgia a great place to do business and an attractive location for foreign investment. Since 2014, we have added 90,000 new jobs in Georgia covering all sectors, including agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, and energy. Doing business in Georgia continues to be easy. Foreign and domestic businesses really operate in a competitive environment with strong guarantees of private property rights. The World Bank also ranks Georgia as the 15th easiest place to do business in the world. In 2014, Georgia achieved an 87% surge in foreign direct investment. And this is the largest growth and highest amount of FDI since 2007. Georgia has also become a major tourist destination, a venue for international sporting events. The world is catching on to the fact that Georgia has it all. Beautiful beaches and stunning mountain resorts, a gourmet tradition, exceptional wines, unique historic sites, and world-class hospitality. In August, Tbilisi hosted two major sporting events: the European Youth Olympic Festival and 2015 UEFA Super Cup. And these sporting events provide a unique opportunity to celebrate cooperation over conflict. And speaking of sports, I must use this opportunity to wish the Georgian national rugby team success as they face New Zealand tomorrow at the Rugby World Cup. Our nation is proud of you guys. Another area of our national development is education. I personally know the value of good education and studying abroad. And I want Georgian youth to have that same opportunity. To that end, we launched a new program where the Georgian government will provide financial support for our students to study abroad. In return, they must come back home and put their skills to use in service to our country. And for those hard-working Georgians who cannot travel abroad, we are bringing world-class education right to Georgia. And I'm proud to say we have recently inaugurated a new program in cooperation with the US Millennium Challenge Corporation so that Georgian students can now obtain US engineering degree from San Diego University without leaving Georgia. But even with all these achievements, dear friends, we still face challenges to our security at home. since my last address to the United Nations, I regret that the Russian Federation signed the so-called integration treaties with Sukhumi and Skinvali. And Russia therefore continues to illegally extend its control over Georgian sovereign territory. I therefore condemn this creeping annexation and Russia's disregard for international law. A tragic result is that the local population in the occupied territories of Georgia are robbed of the fundamental rights of a free people. De facto authorities recently undertook additional measures to suppress still further the Georgians' right to be educated in their mother tongue. The freedom of movement and the basic rights of a free nation are crushed along with the hopes and dreams of hundreds of thousands of victims of ethnic cleansing who only wish to return to their places of origin. I must once again underline the importance of the resolution on the IDPs and refugees from Abkhazia, Georgia, and the Skin Valley region, Georgia, annually adopted by the UN General Assembly. And dear friends, the pain of this conflict is real. The dislocation is profound. Just since 2012, our government has provided homes to approximately 10,000 IDP families from the occupied territories. Against the backdrop of continued Russian occupation, my government has nevertheless been clear on the need to forge responsible and pragmatic relations with the Russian Federation. To that end, we have taken a number of constructive, concrete steps to advance trade, transport, communication, humanitarian contacts, and tourism when and where possible with Russia. But let me be clear, relations with Russia cannot be settled at the expense of our sovereignty and territorial integrity. So I hope that the Russian Federation will finally fulfill its international obligations, including the August 12, 2008 ceasefire agreement, and act as a responsible member of the international community. At the same time, I want to once again reaffirm our strong commitment to the peaceful resolution of this conflict, based on the fundamental principles of international law and the UN Charter. Let me now address the Abkhazian and Ossetian peoples. My brothers and sisters, I firmly believe that no one will rewrite history and erase our common past. And all attempts to cut off the ties and divide our peoples will fail. You'll benefit from a growing Georgian economy soon, and from our association agreement with the European Union, including increasing trade and visa liberalization. We know that the arc of history is for more cooperation, more integration, and more prosperity. So when we work together, we all succeed and benefit. Now I look forward to the day when we will share in our mutual prosperity. Excellencies, despite the challenges, my country seeks to contribute to international peace, security, sustainable development, and economic prosperity. Last year, I had the honor of announcing Georgia's intention to establish a Silk Road Forum. Today, I'm proud that this idea has materialized, and in a few weeks, we will host the first of its kind high-level forum in Tbilisi. My country's location is at a key crossroad linking East with West. This was underscored as Georgia hosted this year both the annual meeting of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the first meeting of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Revitalization of the Silk Road is an important opportunity to ensure deeper economic and cultural ties between Asia and Europe. We're developing strong economic and trade relationship with China, And I think the Silk Road region will open up new opportunities. This region accounts for 2/3 of the world's population and 60% of its GDP. And I'm convinced the Tbilisi Silk Road Forum offers great potential to promote cooperation and regional integration. I also want to comment on the recent P5+1 agreement reached with Iran. My country is hopeful that the process will develop in a positive direction and contribute to greater security and economic development in the wider region. Georgia has shown repeatedly that it is prepared to pay more than its fair share to promote a secure international environment. My country contributed the second largest number of troops after the United States to the Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan. Our soldiers are among the world's best. They are the pride of my nation, and we honor them. I'd like to take a moment to remember all the brave Georgian troops who serve their nation and have given their lives in the pursuit of peace and freedom. My country's contributions to our common security do not end there. Georgia also supports EU peacekeeping efforts, including providing the second largest troop contribution to the EU military mission in the Central African Republic. A core element of Georgia's security and its Euro-Atlantic integration is its ever-deepening relationship with NATO. Following last year's NATO summit, NATO agreed to provide Georgia a substantial package of practical support to strengthen Georgia's armed forces and make us more integrated ally. Most recently, we inaugurated a new joint training and evaluation center in Georgia, where Georgian forces will receive NATO training. And we're also increasing the number of training exercises carried out between Georgia and the United States and Georgia and NATO allies. Excellencies, the United Nations Charter, adopted 70 years ago, was designed to put an end to chaos and to build a better world. Today, the world is still facing unprecedented challenges that require strong political resolve. Where necessary, we must reform international organizations to meet current demands. And in this context, we commend the ongoing interstate negotiations on Security Council reform, which aim at raising the effectiveness of the United Nations in crisis situations, as it is defined by the Charter. Increasing the role of small states in the Security Council, avoiding the misuse of the veto rights, as well as improving the working methods, should be the cornerstone of the reform process. So I express hope that the 70th anniversary of the UN will serve as a reminder to all of us to stand firmly for the principles enshrined in the UN Charter and the goal of peace and stability throughout the world. In conclusion, let me end where I began. Our vision is clear and our future is bright. Let me share my dream for Georgia. I see a country where every young Georgian boy or girl has access to a quality education in order to give them the opportunity to develop their God-given talents. I see a country where people are free from fear of not having the health care and resources they need to protect their family, their livelihood, and their future. I see a strong, prosperous Georgia that leverages its geographic location as a vital crossroads connecting east and west and north and south. I see a strong and proud nation dedicated to facilitating peace among neighbors as well as commerce between continents. I see a country that is a force for good and stability in its own neighborhood, that lives up to its responsibilities as a citizen of the world. So let us work together toward creating a brighter future for the next generations. I thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of Georgia for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear a statement by His Excellency Alexis Tsipras, Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic, His Excellency Alexis Tsipras. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, fellow delegates, ladies and gentlemen, 70 years have passed since the UN was founded after the most disastrous war in history. In the wake of this war, the UN's noble declarations raised hopes for a common peaceful future based on universal values, social justice, and respect of human rights. Much has been since achieved, but regrettably, the vision of the founders of the organization is far from being fulfilled. We witness today a large humanitarian crisis, unprecedented movements of displaced people, and an increase of poverty, violence, extremism, and human rights abuses. Nevertheless, the big question for us is not to identify the challenges we face. The people of this world know very well what they face every day. The big question that this great organization was set up to answer is how do we deal with these challenges on the basis of our shared values on the United Nations Charter. Unfortunately, as years go by, we seem to be returning not only to the same problems, but to the same old failed recipes that fostered these problems in the first place. This is why the biggest challenge we face today is an existential one. Whether to continue with the same old recipes of social exclusion, political fragmentation, and economic aggression, or to try to reclaim our future step by step, with confidence, but also with the ability to learn from our mistakes. Allow me to refer to the efforts of my own country in confronting three specific crises in the last few years. As many other countries, Greece was hit hard by the 2008 economic crisis due to the structural weaknesses of its economy and its high debt and budgetary deficits. Yet the neoliberal recipe we and other European countries were called to implement came at devastating social cost and contributed to deepening the economic and fiscal crisis instead of curing it. We lost 25% of our GDP. Our debt-GDP ratio grew to 180%, while unemployment reached 27%, and the migration of graduates to European countries accelerated. What we faced was a firm commitment of some to the idea that Greece must exit the Eurozone, or that the institutional and structural reforms that we need have to be combined with austerity, tough austerity measures, and welfare and wage cuts. After many months of negotiation, Greece agreed to a new stabilization program that includes reforms in our public administration, pension and tax system, and gives us the opportunity to stabilize our economy by setting the foundation for a necessary reprofiling of our debt. Unfortunately, at the same time, it imposes measures burdening further both society and the economy. These measures should have been avoided. We need it and still need to struggle step by step to claim a growth rather than an austerity agenda, to protect the most vulnerable members of society and distribute tax burdens justly, to link the development of the economy and the restoration of confidence to the need for a restructuring of our debt. How familiar does this sound to others in this assembly? How many times since the 70s have countries in the developed and more recently in the developing world struggled to face exactly these problems that concern not just their weaknesses, but the recipes they are given to deal with them? We have to realize that we need a global financial and economic system oriented to fostering national growth strategies and our post-2015 development agenda. We have to discuss the issue of debt restructuring in all competent fora, including this one, in connection to developing growth and not austerity strategies. Another regional European crisis where Greece is at the forefront concerns recent unprecedented migration flows. Since the beginning of the year, over 300,000 people, mostly from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, have entered the country with the aim of transiting to Western European countries. Greece, like all other European countries, was taken aback by this development. Nevertheless, the people of Greece showed their solidarity in providing food and shelter to the refugees. In cooperation with the European Union and other international organizations, we are doing all we can to manage these flows in an effective and humane way by improving reception facilities and identification procedures, as well as setting up hotspots to facilitate relocation. Nevertheless, for some, the only way to deal with this challenge is to build walls higher, to repel migrants by force, or to ensure that they remain someone else's responsibility as far away as possible. We do not believe that the future of Europe or the future of our world can be built on ever higher walls or children dying at our doorsteps. Neither can we forget that many of our ancestors were refugees and migrants. We cannot allow racism and xenophobia to destroy our common principles. In the framework of the UN, we have to build the necessary resettlement mechanism from countries neighboring Syria, while also supporting them directly in hosting refugees and dismantling trafficking networks. This resettlement mechanism, together with the existing relocation mechanism in Europe, will give hope to these people, discouraging them from trusting traffickers. Furthermore, we have to increase support for frontline European states such as Greece in their effort to manage these flows. Greece is also at the center of a third security crisis that causes this refugee crisis. We are at the heart of a triangle of destabilization with Ukraine to the north and the conflicts in Libya and in the Middle East to the southwest and southeast. Located in this unstable environment, Greece has been striving to bolster regional security and supports all efforts promoting peace and stability. Nevertheless, again, we hear some insisting that we should embark on unilateral initiatives without considering their prospects and consequences, or leave the conflicts to be settled by themselves without contributing to stabilization or reconstruction. Yet these are exactly the mistakes that brought us here in the first place. We do not have the luxury to make foreign policy choices without examining in advance what their consequences will be. In Syria, we must act decisively in favor of reconciliation and a political solution that would lay the ground for the Syrian-led democratic transition foreseen in the Geneva Communiqué. In this regard, we support initiatives aiming at engagement with all relevant international and regional actors. In Libya, we fully support United Nations efforts, and we welcome the successful completion of negotiations and political dialogue last week. Furthermore, we believe that the Middle East peace process is of key importance for the region. A new momentum for a solution must be promoted with a view to the creation of a state of Palestine on the basis of the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, that coexists peacefully with Israel. Concerning Ukraine, we support its territorial integrity, independence and sovereignty with its internationally recognized borders. We appreciate the efforts of the Normandy Group and the conciliatory role of the OSCE to avoid a vicious cycle of militarization in the region. And we call on the Minsk Agreement signatories to implement the agreements in full. We are also deeply concerned about the rise of jihadism, which must be dealt with decisively and comprehensively. Beyond the crisis I mentioned, Greece attaches particular importance to engagement with its immediate neighborhood. Also, it's important to foster new initiatives rather than remain trapped in the dead ends of the past. I spoke of the need to avoid constructing walls, and truly, it is shameful that for the last 41 years, the same number as my age, Cyprus remains divided. Today, more than ever, and in light of the instability in our region, it's important that the momentum is grasped for a mutually acceptable, just, viable, and comprehensive solution to the Cypriot issue, based on the relevant United Nations resolution and on Cyprus' membership on the European Union, to the benefit of all the people of Cyprus, Greek and Turkish Cypriots, as well as all other communities. In this context, I would like to underline Greece's full support to intercommunal talks held under the leadership of President Anastasiadis and the head of the Turkish Cypriot community, Mr. Akinci. I firmly believe that any real and lasting solution will have to eventually deal with the international issue of security. The cancellation of the anachronistic treaties of alliance and guarantees, and the withdrawal of all foreign troops, including the troops occupying the northern part of this island. As a regional player keen on promoting security in the area, Greece has been making steady efforts to improve cooperation with Turkey. We have done so through a wide range of initiatives, including the promotion of our dialogue on confidence-building measures. full respect of good neighborly relations and international law by Turkey, as well as a just and viable solution to the Cypriot issue, remain a precondition for full normalization of Greek-Turkish relations. In the Western Balkans, we promote robust bilateral relations and the commitment to the region's European perspective. Greece has stepped up efforts towards the settlement of all differences in the region, among them the name issue of the former Yugoslavia Republic of Macedonia. We have proposed a pragmatic settlement framework aiming at reaching an agreement and agreed a set of confidence-building measures which provide us with an opportunity to further enhance bilateral cooperation and trust. Mr. President, people all around the globe are striving for a better future for them and their children. People in my country are struggling every day with pride and dignity to overcome crises and regain hope. Even if their most difficult moments, they are assisting those more in need, those fleeing conflict zones. Even in their most difficult moments, they are asserting their democratic right to choose their own fate. This is a daily example of people insisting, even under the most difficult conditions, on their basic humanity and democratic rights. This example should guide us in taking the necessary steps towards a safer, just and prosperous world for ourselves and the future generations to live in. Thank you very much.
On behalf of General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear a statement by His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for Health, and Minister for Communication of the State of Israel. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming the Prime Minister, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for Health, and Minister for Communication of the State of Israel, His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you greetings from Jerusalem, the city in which the Jewish people's hopes and prayers for peace for all of humanity have echoed throughout the ages. 31 years ago, as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, I stood at this podium for the first time. I spoke that day against a resolution sponsored by Iran to expel Israel from the United Nations. Then as now, the UN was obsessively hostile towards Israel, the one true democracy in the Middle East. Then as now, some sought to deny the one and only Jewish state a place among the nations. I ended that first speech by saying, gentlemen, check your fanaticism at the door. More than 3 decades later, as the Prime Minister of Israel, I'm again privileged to speak from this podium. And for me, that privilege has always come with a moral responsibility to speak the truth. So after 3 days of listening to world leaders praise the nuclear deal with Iran, I begin my speech today by saying, ladies and gentlemen, check your enthusiasm at the door. You see, this deal doesn't make peace more likely. By fueling Iran's aggressions with billions of dollars in sanctions relief, it makes war more likely. Just look at what Iran has done in the last 6 months alone, since the framework agreement was announced in Lausanne. Iran boosted its supply of devastating weapons to Syria. Iran sent more soldiers of its Revolutionary Guard into Syria. Iran sent thousands of Afghani and Pakistani Shiite fighters to Syria. Iran did all this to prop up Assad's brutal regime. Iran also shipped tons of weapons and ammunition to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, including another shipment just 2 days ago. Iran threatened to topple Jordan. Iran's proxy, Hezbollah, smuggled into Lebanon SA-22 missiles to down our planes and Yahoun cruise missiles to sink our ships. Iran supplied Hezbollah with precision-guided surface-to-surface missiles and attack drones so it can accurately hit any target in Israel. Iran aided Hamas and Islamic Jihad in building armed drones in Gaza. Iran also made clear its plans to open 2 new terror fronts against Israel, promising to arm Palestinians in the West Bank and sending its Revolutionary Guard generals to the Golan Heights, from which its operatives recently fired rockets on northern Israel. Israel will continue to respond forcefully to any attacks against it from Syria. Israel will continue to act to prevent the transfer of strategic weapons to Hezbollah from and through Syrian territory. Every few weeks, Iran and Hezbollah set up new terror cells in cities throughout the world. 3 such cells were recently uncovered in Kuwait, Jordan, and Cyprus. In May, security forces in Cyprus raided a Hezbollah agent's apartment in the city of Larnaca. There they found 5 tons of ammonium nitrate. That's roughly the same amount of ammonium nitrate that was used to blow up the federal building in Oklahoma City. And that's just in one apartment, in one city, in one country. But Iran is setting up dozens of terror cells like this around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, they're setting up those terror cells in this hemisphere too. I repeat, Iran's been doing all of this, everything that I've just described, just in the last 6 months, when it was trying to convince the world to remove the sanctions. Now just imagine what Iran will do after those sanctions are lifted. Unleashed and unmuzzled, Iran will go on the prowl, devouring more and more prey. In the wake of the nuclear deal, Iran is spending billions of dollars on weapons and satellites. You think Iran is doing that to advance peace? You think hundreds of billions of dollars in sanctions relief and fat contracts will turn this rapacious tiger into a kitten? If you do, you should think again. In 2013, President Rouhani began his so-called charm offensive here at the UN. 2 years later, Iran is executing more political prisoners, escalating its regional aggression, and rapidly expanding its global terror network. You know, they say actions speak louder than words. But in Iran's case, the words speak as loud as the actions. Just listen to the deputy commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Quds Force. Here's what he said in February, quote, "The Islamic Revolution is not limited by geographic borders." He boasted that Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and Yemen are among the countries being, quote, "conquered by the Islamic Republic of Iran," end quote. Conquered. And for those of you who believe that the deal in Vienna will bring a change in Iran's policy, just listen to what Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, said 5 days after the nuclear deal was reached. Quote, "Our policies towards the arrogant government of the United States will not change. The United States," he vowed, "will continue to be Iran's enemy." While giving the mullahs more money is likely to fuel more repression inside Iran, it will definitely fuel more aggression outside Iran. As the leader of a country defending itself every day against Iran's growing aggression, I wish I could take comfort in the claim that this deal blocks Iran's path to nuclear weapons. But I can't, because it doesn't. This deal does place several constraints on Iran's nuclear program, and rightly so, because the international community recognizes that Iran is so dangerous. But you see, here's the catch. Under this deal, if Iran doesn't change its behavior, in fact, if it becomes even more dangerous in the years to come, the most important constraints will still be automatically lifted by year 10 and by year 15. That would place a militant Islamic terror regime weeks away from having the fissile material for an entire arsenal of nuclear bombs. That just doesn't make any sense. I've said that if Iran wants to be treated like a normal country, let it act like a normal country. But this deal will treat Iran like a normal country even if it remains a dark theocracy that conquers its neighbors, sponsors terrorism worldwide, and chants "death to Israel, death to America." Does anyone seriously believe that flooding a radical theocracy with weapons and cash will curb its appetite for aggression? Do any of you really believe that a theocratic Iran with sharper claws and sharper fangs will be more likely to change its stripes? So here's a general rule that I've learned, and you must have learned in your lifetime. When bad behavior is rewarded, it only gets worse. Ladies and gentlemen, I've long said that the greatest danger facing our world is the coupling of militant Islam with nuclear weapons. And I'm gravely concerned that the nuclear deal with Iran will prove to be the marriage certificate of that unholy union. I know that some well-intentioned people sincerely believe that this deal is the best way to block Iran's path to the bomb. But one of history's most important, yet least learned lessons is this: the best intentions don't prevent the worst outcomes. The vast majority of Israelis believe that this nuclear deal with Iran is a very bad deal. And what makes matters even worse is that we see a world celebrating this bad deal, rushing to embrace and do business with a regime openly committed to our destruction. Last week, Major General Salehi, the commander of Iran's army, proclaimed this, quote, "We will annihilate Israel for sure. We are glad that we are in the forefront of executing the Supreme Leader's order to destroy Israel." End quote. And as for the Supreme Leader himself, a few days after the nuclear deal was announced, he released his latest book. Here it is. It's a 400-page screed detailing his plan to destroy the state of Israel. Last month, Khamenei once again made his genocidal intentions clear before Iran's top clerical body, the Assembly of Experts. He spoke about Israel, home to over 6 million Jews. He pledged, quote, "There will be no Israel in 25 years." End quote. 70 years after the murder of 6 million Jews, Iran's rulers promised to destroy my country, murder my people. And the response from this body, the response from nearly every one of the governments represented here, has been absolutely nothing. Utter silence. Deafening silence. Perhaps you can now understand why Israel is not joining you in celebrating this deal. If Iran's rulers were working to destroy your countries, perhaps you'd be less enthusiastic about the deal. If Iran's terror proxies were firing thousands of rockets at your cities, perhaps you'd be more measured in your praise. And if this deal were unleashing a nuclear arms race in your neighborhood, perhaps you'd be more reluctant to celebrate. But don't think that Iran is only a danger to Israel. Besides Iran's aggression in the Middle East and its terror around the world, Iran is also building intercontinental ballistic missiles whose sole purpose is to carry nuclear warheads. Now remember this, Iran already has missiles that can reach Israel. So those intercontinental ballistic missiles that Iran is building, they're not meant for us. They're meant for you, for Europe, for America, for raining down mass destruction anytime, anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not easy to oppose something that is embraced by the greatest powers in the world. Believe me, it would be far easier to remain silent. But throughout our history, the Jewish people have learned the heavy price of silence. And as the Prime Minister of the Jewish state, as someone who knows that history, I refuse to be silent. I'll say it again. The days when the Jewish people remained passive in the face of genocidal enemies, those days are over. Not being passive means speaking up about those dangers. We have, we are, we will. Not being passive also means defending ourselves against those dangers. We have, we are, and we will. Israel will not allow Iran to break in, to sneak in, or to walk into the nuclear weapons club. I know that preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons remains the official policy of the international community. But no one should question Israel's determination to defend itself against those who seek our destruction. For in every generation, there were those who rose up to destroy our people. In antiquity, we faced destruction from the ancient empires of Babylon and Rome. In the Middle Ages, we faced inquisition and expulsion. And in modern times, we face pogroms and the Holocaust. Yet the Jewish people persevered. And now another regime has arisen, swearing to destroy Israel. That regime would be wise to consider this. I stand here today representing Israel, a country 67 years young, but the nation state of a people nearly 4,000 years old. Yet the empires of Babylon and Rome are not represented in this Hall of Nations. Neither is the 1,000-year Reich. Those seemingly invincible empires are long gone. But Israel lives. The people of Israel live. Am Yisrael Chai. The rebirth of Israel is a testament to the indomitable spirit of my people. For 100 generations, the Jewish people dreamed of returning to the land of Israel. Even in our darkest hours, and we had so many, even in our darkest hours, we never of rebuilding our eternal capital, Jerusalem. The establishment of Israel made realizing that dream possible. It has enabled us to live as a free people in our ancestral homeland. It's enabled us to embrace Jews who've come from the four corners of the earth to find refuge from persecution. They came from war-torn Europe, from Yemen, Iraq, Morocco, from Ethiopia and the Soviet Union, from 100 other lands. And today, as a rising tide of anti-Semitism once again sweeps across Europe and elsewhere, many Jews come to Israel to join us in building the Jewish future. So here's my message to the rulers of Iran. Your plan to destroy Israel will fail. Israel will not permit any force on earth to threaten its future. And here's my message to all the countries represented here. Whatever resolutions you may adopt in this building, whatever decisions you may take in your capitals, Israel will do whatever it must do to defend our state and to defend our people. Distinguished delegates, as this deal with Iran moves ahead, I hope you'll enforce it. How can I put this? With a little more rigor than you showed with the 6 Security Council resolutions that Iran has systematically violated and which now have been effectively discarded. Make sure that the inspectors actually inspect. Make sure that the snapback sanctions actually snap back. And make sure that Iran's violations aren't swept under the Persian rug. Well, of one thing I can assure you, Israel will be watching closely. What the international community now needs to do is clear. First, make Iran comply with all its nuclear obligations. Keep Iran's feet to the fire. Second, check Iran's regional aggression. Support and strengthen those fighting Iran's aggression, beginning with Israel. Third, use sanctions and all the tools available to you to tear down Iran's global terror network. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel is working closely with our Arab peace partners to address our common security challenges from Iran and also the security challenges from ISIS and from others. We're also working with other states in the Middle East, as well as countries in Africa, in Asia, and beyond. Many in our region know that both Iran and ISIS are our common enemies. And when your enemies fight each other, don't strengthen either one, weaken both. Common dangers are clearly bringing Israel and its Arab neighbors closer. And as we work together to thwart those dangers, I hope we'll build lasting partnerships lasting partnerships for security, for prosperity, and for peace. But in Israel, we never forget one thing. We never forget that the most important partner that Israel has always been and will always be the United States of America. The alliance between Israel and the United States is unshakable. President Obama and I agree on the need to keep arms out of the hands of Iran terror proxies. We agree on the need to stop Iran from destabilizing countries throughout the Middle East. Israel deeply appreciates President Obama's willingness to bolster our security, help Israel maintain its qualitative military edge, and help Israel confront the enormous challenges we face. Israel is grateful that this sentiment is widely shared by the American people and its representative in Congress, by both those who supported the deal and by those who opposed it. President Obama and I have both said that our differences over the nuclear deal are a disagreement within the family. But we have no disagreement about the need to work together to secure our common future. And what a great future it could be. Israel is uniquely poised to seize the promise of the 21st century. Israel is a world leader in science and technology, in cyber, software, water, agriculture, medicine, biotechnology, and so many other fields that are being revolutionized by Israeli ingenuity and Israeli innovation. Israel is the innovation nation. Israeli know-how is everywhere. It's in your computer's microprocessors and flash drives. It's in your smartphones when you send instant messages and navigate your cars. It's on your farms when you drip irrigate your crops and keep your grains and produce fresh. It's in your universities when you study Nobel Prize-winning discoveries in chemistry and economics. It's in your medicine cabinets when you use drugs to treat Parkinson's disease and multiple sclerosis. It's even on your plate when you eat the delicious cherry tomato. That too was perfected in Israel, in case you didn't know. We are so proud in Israel of the long strides our country has made in such a short time. We're so proud that our small country is making such a huge contribution to the entire world. Yet the dreams of our people, enshrined for eternity by the great prophets of the Bible, those dreams will be fully realized only when there is peace. As the Middle East descends into chaos, Israel's peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan are two cornerstones of stability. Israel remains committed to achieving peace with the Palestinians as well. Israelis know the price of war. I know the price of war. I was nearly killed in battle. I lost many friends. I lost my beloved brother Yoni. Those who know the price of war can best appreciate what the blessings of peace would mean. for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren. I am prepared to immediately resume direct peace negotiations with the Palestinian Authority without any preconditions whatsoever. Unfortunately, President Abbas said yesterday that he is not prepared to do this. Well, I hope he changes his mind, because I remain committed to a vision of 2 states for 2 peoples, in which a demilitarized Palestinian state recognizes the Jewish state. You know, the peace process began over 2 decades ago. Yet, despite the best efforts of 6 Israeli prime ministers, Rabin, Peres, Barak, Sharon, Olmert, and myself, the Palestinians have consistently refused to end the conflict and make a final peace with Israel. And unfortunately, you heard that rejectionism yet again, only yesterday, from President Abbas. How can Israel make peace with a Palestinian partner who refuses to even sit at the negotiating table? Israel expects the Palestinian Authority to abide by its commitments. The Palestinians should not walk away from peace. President Abbas, I know it's not easy. I know it's hard. But we owe it to our peoples to try, to continue to try. Because together, if we actually negotiate and stop negotiating about the negotiations, if we actually sit down and try to resolve this conflict between us, recognize each other, not use a Palestinian state as a stepping stone for another Islamist dictatorship in the Middle East, but something that will live at peace next to the Jewish state. If we actually do that, we can do remarkable things for our peoples. The UN can help advance peace by supporting direct, unconditional negotiations between the parties. The UN won't help peace, certainly won't help advance peace, by trying to impose solutions or by encouraging Palestinian rejectionism. And the UN distinguished delegates should do one more thing. The UN should finally rid itself of the obsessive bashing of Israel. Here's just one absurd example of this obsession. In 4 years of horrific violence in Syria, more than 250,000 people have lost their lives. That's more than 10 times the number of Israelis and Palestinians combined who've lost their lives in a century of conflict between us. Yet last year, this assembly adopted 20 resolutions against Israel and just one resolution about the savage slaughter in Syria. Talk about injustice. Talk about disproportionality. 20. Count them. One against Syria. Well, frankly, I'm not surprised. To borrow a line from Yogi Berra, the late, great baseball player and part-time philosopher, when it comes to the annual bashing of Israel at the UN, It's deja vu all over again. Enough. 31 years after I stood here for the first time, I'm still asking, when will the UN finally check its anti-Israel fanaticism at the door? When will the UN finally stop slandering Israel as a threat to peace and actually start helping Israel advance peace? And the same question should be posed to Palestinian leaders. When will you start working with Israel to advance peace and reconciliation and stop libeling Israel, stop inciting hatred and violence? President Abbas, here's a good place to begin. Stop spreading lies about Israel's alleged intentions on the Temple Mounts. Israel is fully committed to maintaining the status quo there. What President Abbas should be speaking out against are the actions of militant Islamists who are smuggling explosives into the Al-Aqsa Mosque and who are trying to prevent Jews and Christians from visiting the holy sites. That's the real threat to these sacred sites. A 1,000 years before the birth of Christianity, more than 1,500 years before the birth of Islam, King David made Jerusalem our capital, and King Solomon built the temple on that mount. Yet Israel will always respect the sacred shrines of all in a region plagued by violence and by unimaginable intolerance, in which Islamic fanatics are destroying the ancient treasures of civilization. Israel stands out as a towering beacon of enlightenment and tolerance. Far from endangering the holy sites, it is Israel that ensures their safety. Because unlike the powers who have ruled Jerusalem in the past, Israel respects the holy sites and freedom of worship of all, Jews, Muslims, Christians, everyone. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will never change, because Israel will always stay true to its values. These values are on display each and every day when Israel's feisty parliament vigorously debates every issue under the sun, when Israel's Chief Justice sits in her chair in our fiercely independent Supreme Court, when our Christian community continues to grow and thrive from year to year as Christian communities are decimated elsewhere in the Middle East, when a brilliant young Israeli Muslim student gives her valedictorian address at one of our finest universities, and when Israeli doctors and nurses from the Israeli military treat thousands of wounded from the killing fields of Syria and thousands more in the wake of natural disasters from Haiti to Nepal. This is the true face of Israel. These are the values of Israel. And in the Middle East, these values are under savage assault by militant Islamists who are forcing millions of terrified people to flee to distant shores. 10 miles from ISIS, a few hundred yards from Iran's murderous proxies, Israel stands in the breach, proudly and courageously defending freedom and progress. Israel is civilization's front line in the battle against barbarism. So here's a novel idea for the United Nations. Instead of continuing the shameful routine of bashing Israel, stand with Israel. Stand with Israel as we check the fanaticism at our door. Stand with Israel as we prevent that fanaticism from reaching your door. Ladies and gentlemen, stand with Israel, because Israel is not just defending itself. More than ever, Israel is defending you.
On behalf of General Assembly, I wish to thank Prime Minister of the State of Israel for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear a statement by His Excellency Dato Sri Najib bin Tun Haji Abdul Razak, Prime Minister of Malaysia. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. I have great pleasure in welcoming the Prime Minister of Malaysia, His Excellency Dato Sri Najib bin Tun Haji Abdul Razak. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, congratulations on your appointment as President of the 70th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Your experience and wisdom will be invaluable in guiding us. This session's theme, the United Nations at 70, the road ahead for peace, security, and human rights, is timely. For we urgently need to find new approaches, to rise above the political divide and put people first in an age when the old ways are proving inadequate to the challenges we face today. We are a world of nation-states, but new conflicts and threats imperiling our peace and security do not recognize borders. Non-state actors, such as the so-called Islamic State, threaten to destroy sovereign states. They don't confine their horrific acts of cruelty within official boundaries. Expert at using social media to recruit followers in faraway countries, they lure them with false promises, persuading many young people that their barbaric actions will bring them closer to God. It is sickening, and there could be no greater slur on Islam, a religion of peace, moderation, and justice. But these extremists cannot be defeated by traditional military means alone. Mr. President, 5 years ago, I stood before this assembly and called for a global movement of moderates, a movement of all religions, of all countries, to marginalize extremists, to reclaim the center, and to shape the agenda towards peace and pragmatism. We in Malaysia have followed up, both with practical action and building intellectual capacity. Central to this effort is reaffirming Islam's true nature, as we must acknowledge that we are not winning the propaganda war against the so-called Islamic State. Their twisted narrative is not being adequately countered. to prevent many misguided people from joining or supporting from afar. So it is more important than ever that we spread awareness about authentic Islam, most especially when conflicts persist and people lose hope. For it is there that extremism finds fertile soil. And those who fight for extremism, for a perversion of true Islam, are one of the main drivers of the current migration crisis from the Middle East. Islam unequivocally prohibits killing civilians during war. It explicitly protects minorities and respects those of other faiths. It urges the pursuit of knowledge and stresses both justice and compassion. As the Prophet Muhammad said, and I quote, "You will not enter paradise until you have faith, and you will not complete your faith till you love for one another what you love for yourselves." This means there should be no strife amongst Muslims, not between Shia and Sunni, who may take different paths but seek the same destination. Islam condemns the destruction of historical sites that are part of the world's cultural heritage. The lies of IS include the claim that it is their duty to destroy historical sites because Prophet Muhammad destroyed the idols that had been introduced into the Kaaba in Makkah. This is based on a false analogy. The Kaaba was built by Prophet Abraham for the worship of the one true God, and later generations added the idols. The Prophet Muhammad was commanded to purify the Kaaba of these idols for its use by his followers, to bring it back to its original form. The historical sites being destroyed by IS were never used for the worship of the one God and then later desecrated. So the argument for destroying them does not and cannot apply. Moreover, God informs us that these sites we travel by and which denote past civilizations, some of which were global superpowers of their time, but are now no more, are signs. They are signs to remind us not to be arrogant, but to walk the earth humbly. We must combat IS, its warped ideology, in this way, by explaining why their path is un-Islamic, why their actions are evil, theologically incoherent, and a travesty of Islam, which commands us to be knowledgeable, to be compassionate, and to be humble. Mr. President, the Malaysian government has helped develop an important body of scholarship that does just that. An international group of Sunni and Shia scholars representing a cross-section of the global Muslim community was convened in Kuala Lumpur. Its mission was to define an Islamic state based on the continuity of Islamic religious thought through the past 14 centuries. It is nothing like the entity in Syria and Iraq that usurps that name. The scholars unanimously emphasize that an Islamic state must deliver justice in all its forms, be it political, economic, and in courts to its citizens. It must be based on the objectives of Sharia or Maqasid Sharia, which is to protect and enhance life, religion, intellect, property, family, and dignity. An Islamic state must defend the different peoples under its rule and preserve their religions, languages, and historic sites, because God commands us. And I quote from the Quran, "Indeed, we have made you nations and tribes, that ye may know one another." God could have created us as one religious community, but He did not do so in order to test us and orders us to compete with each other in being virtuous. A true Islamic state, therefore, aids God's divine intent in testing humanity and urges us to compete in virtue, in knowledge, kindness, compassion, and humility, but crucially, not coerce us in this. These are Islam's true principles. The so-called Islamic State knows nothing of Islam's noble ideals, of its compassion, or of its solemn duty to care for and learn about our fellow men. They are violating the divine will. They are desecrating the name of our religion through their self-proclaimed caliphate, to which no true Muslim will pledge allegiance. This is the message we must spread to Muslims and non-Muslims. And I call on the Ummah to rise with one voice and let the world ring when we say to IS, "You do not represent us." Mr. President, let no one doubt how seriously Malaysia regards the problem of militants, both those who wish to use Kuala Lumpur as a transit point and those who wish to sow violence and destruction at home. Much of this work cannot be revealed for security reasons. This may lead some to think that because Malaysia has not suffered from a successful terrorist attack, we do not have national security challenges. That, Mr. President, is not the case. Our tireless, ever-vigilant security forces have intercepted many would-be IS recruits transiting through Kuala Lumpur. It is because of our efforts that they have not fallen into the darkness that blights Syria and Iraq. But unfortunately, some have. We have identified 39 Malaysians who have traveled to join IS. We have arrested over 100 of our citizens suspected of links to IS. These threats are real. There are people who want to bring terror to our streets. We will not stand for it, neither will they succeed. For Malaysia has been and will always be a land where many faiths and ethnicities freely prosper and thrive. We must strive harder to combat this threat together. Militaries and intelligence services need to share information, and countries need to collaborate more daring to preemptively arrest as necessary. We have instituted legislations to allow this. When evidence is irrefutable, we must unhesitatingly take action. If our citizens' lives are threatened by bombing a mall or a station, we would be negligent of their trust not to intervene before it is too late. Mr. President, 2015 gave us examples of inspiring new approaches. For example, the United States restoring diplomatic relations with Cuba. This was a historic achievement, an exemplary display of moderation in action. It took courage. It would not have happened had those wishing to cling to old political divisions held sway. Forward-thinking leaders always put their people's interests first. Similar courage, Mr. President, is needed to permanently address the injustice suffered by the Palestinians since 1948. Decades of impunity and the systematic dehumanization of Palestinians has culminated in increasing violence, increasing illegal settlements, and increasing violations of rights. The frustration and anger felt by the Palestinians resonates with Muslims worldwide. If the world continues to turn a blind eye to their sufferings, we risk another catastrophe in the occupied Palestinian territory. We'll also fail to uphold the right to self-determination, which was at the very basis of the United Nations when it was created 70 years ago. On that note, given the Rosh Hashanah violations of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem and aggression against its worshippers 3 weeks ago, I call on the Israeli government to live up to Judaism's highest ethical principles and the essential message of the Torah as succinctly expressed by the 1st century BC sage Hillel. When asked to describe the Torah in a soundbite, he said, and I quote, "That which is hateful to you, don't do to your fellow human being." End of quote. This dictum, known universally in all religions as the Golden Rule, could herald the dawn of a much-needed revised relationship between Muslims and Jews. Currently, Israel has forced its authority over Islam's third holiest site in defiance of the jurisdiction of King Abdullah of Jordan, the lawful custodian. It is therefore Israel's duty to facilitate Muslims from around the world to visit. For this is an aspiration that all devout Muslims harbor and pray to be able to realize in their lifetime. Mr. President, putting people first will not always be easy, but the problems of today require new and global solutions. Malaysia will raise these issues as a member of the UN Security Council, and reforming the Security Council to better reflect represent a good start towards building a new, adequately responsive global architecture. We in Malaysia know how much that is needed. We were extremely disappointed that the proposed resolution to set up an international tribunal in the shooting down of flight MH17 did not go through because a veto was imposed. We will continue to seek justice through other legal options because we owe it to the families. We owe to the families of those who perish in this outrageous crime. But whether it be reform of the UN, tackling extremism, or dealing with migration, greater mutual effort is necessary. We must look into ourselves and our own traditions to create new mechanisms. We believe that moderation is key. Moderation is not about being weak. On the contrary, it is courageous and shows strength. The strength to push for peace and to put people first. It is a principle that runs through all civilizations and faiths. Islam embodies it in the concept of wasatiyah, Confucianism as chung yung, both of which mean middle path or the golden mean. But this is a principle we must rediscover. And at the 26th ASEAN Summit in Malaysia this April, we reaffirm our commitment to this approach when we adopted Langkawi Declaration on the Global Movement of Moderates. Malaysia stands ready to share its experience of upholding Islam, marginalizing extremism, while practicing democracy, or maintaining a multi-ethnic society where different faiths coexist and prosper, and showing that Islam can not only succeed, but Islam can drive progress and successful economic development. Mr. President, as we cooperate to solve the scourges of poverty, hatred, war, and man-made and natural disasters that have given us the refugee crisis we see today, we must draw from our spiritual traditions and that generosity of spirit which goes beyond legal requirement. Surah Abasa, the 80th chapter of the Quran, opens with God criticizing Prophet Muhammad, whom we Muslims regard as God's beloved, because he frowned and he turned his face away when one of his followers, a poor blind man, interrupted to ask him a question while he was occupied preaching to a rich and powerful unbeliever. If God promptly rebuked Prophet Muhammad, how much more will we, the community of Muslim world leaders especially, stand to be rebuked by our Creator if we frown and turn our faces away from our fellow Muslim, poor and marginalized, now fleeing Syria in massive numbers, causing social and economic stresses in Europe? Don't we stand partly responsible for any ensuing European hostility towards Islam, the faith we love, and towards our fellow Muslims? This is why Malaysia has taken over the years many people fleeing war, starvation, and persecution. We currently have hundreds of thousands of irregular migrants, and we took in more earlier this year when there was a dire humanitarian situation in the Andaman Sea. I am pleased to announce today that to help alleviate the current refugee crisis, Malaysia will do its share and open our doors to a further 3,000 Syrian migrants over the next 3 years. New international solutions are needed to deal with the migration crisis. The millions fleeing are people, and there are people like us. They should concern us all. We must respect our common humanity, for it is only when we transcend the silos of race and faith, only when we look at images of desperate migrants, the victims of extremists, and those whose lives are degraded by hunger and poverty. And what do we see? We see not strangers, but we see our brothers and sisters. And it is only when we see that dreadful picture of that 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi washed ashore and recognize our own children in that tragic boy's innocent face that we will act as our better selves. People around the world cry out for our help. We cannot, we must not pass on by. I thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of Malaysia for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I now give the floor to His Excellency Miroslav Lajčák, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign and European Affairs of Slovakia. Please.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. During the past 70 years, we, the Member States, have been driven by the noble ideals and inspirations of the visionary United Nations founders laid down in its charter. At the same time, we've been regularly confronted with the grim realities of international affairs. Over its history, the United Nations, both as an intergovernmental organization and as an actor on the world stage, has been tested by numerous conflicts, humanitarian crises, and immense political and economic changes in the world, as well as lack of financial stability. All these years, the United Nations has played a crucial role in preventing global conflicts and carried out vital work around the world in its service to humankind. Encouraging the development and codification of international law as a way of regulating international relations has been a major contribution of the United Nations since its very beginning. We should take a step back and see how far we have come and how far we need to go in meeting the challenges across the three pillars of the organization's work: peace and security, development, and human rights. New and acute challenges to the multilateral system and threats to peace and security that transcend national borders have unfortunately emerged. Pandemics, climate change, migration, cybersecurity, or the multifaceted and violent nature of terrorism, including organized crime, are the threats that concern each and every one of us. There are no exceptions. And the right place where all these threats should be addressed and eventually solved is the United Nations. I'm deeply convinced that the United Nations remains strategically positioned to provide leadership and effective multilateral response. Strong and effective United Nations means a better world, a more caring and accepting world, a world in which nations, peoples of different religion, culture, and history can live together in peace, a world where right is might and not might makes right. I believe that strengthening the United Nations is the best investment to achieve the universal desire for peace, development, equality, and justice in the world. We should collectively seek practical means that will enable the current system to live up to its original purposes, that will enable the United Nations to meet the weighty demands which are made upon it today, tomorrow, and in many years to come. It is the member states who own the United Nations. Every country, big or small, from north or south, landlocked or an island, has an important individual responsibility and role to play as a driver of the change. My government has had continued strong confidence in the United Nations and remains ready to fully shoulder its responsibility and commitments in this regard. Mr. President, the scale of global development challenges is unprecedented. A couple of days ago, in this very place, we adopted the historical document defining Sustainable Development Goals, Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We may call it a program for a better planet. This program is not about the numbers. This program is about changing our mindsets. It is setting up the new philosophy of existence in sustainable future. Its cornerstone is full inclusivity and zero disparity. Mr. President, the global security environment has never been as dynamic and uncertain as today. The number of major civil wars has almost tripled. The volumes of battle death have skyrocketed. The most worrisome fact is an increased number of civilian casualties, including women and children. The United Nations works to maintain international peace and security in a world where security threats are becoming more complex and asymmetric, and conflicts more intractable and less conducive to traditional political settlements. The current pattern of violence has also serious implications for the implementation of protection of civilian mandates in the field. In areas where the United Nations has had a presence, it has increasingly come under attack. Naturally, in such conditions, the level and the main priorities for the United Nations involvement are being re-evaluated in a process of strategic reflection. A secondary effect is a dramatic increase of the number of refugees. The World Bank estimates that roughly 1/5 of the world's population is affected by some form of violence or insecurity. The total number of people forcibly displaced by war, conflict, and persecution rose to roughly 60 million at the end of 2014. We are confronted on a daily basis with the gruesome images in the news or directly in our streets, squares, and ports of transportation. Forced displacement has sadly become a deliberate and widespread tactic, meaning displacement is not only a short-term humanitarian problem, but also a long-term development and state-building issue. The current migration crisis is one of the most complex challenges we have to face upfront and address together. It affects all of us, the countries of origin, transit, and destination. Thus, it requires joint responses. Both immediate as well as long-term measures are absolutely necessary to address these challenges, which include illegal migration, smuggling and trafficking of human beings, and gross human rights violations. We must offer our assistance to those in need and prevent further tragedies involving refugees. For that to happen, we need a systematic and comprehensive action, close cooperation of countries, both of origin and of destination, that will bring a long-term sustainable solution. We must address the root causes of migration, namely conflicts, intolerance, violence, poverty, lack of conditions for decent life, just to mention a few of them. Mr. President, as acknowledged many times before, it is peacekeeping in which the irreplaceable nature of this organization is most marked. The last 2 decades have significantly tested the concept and conduct of the United Nations peacekeeping operations. Slovakia has been an active contributor and stands ready to continue its cooperation with the United Nations in this field. I was particularly pleased to see that both review panels have put strong emphasis on enhanced conflict prevention, diplomatic engagement, and mediation support in the work of the United Nations system. Speaking from my personal experience as a mediator in Southeastern Europe, I cannot but support the importance and high relevance of preventive diplomacy across the conflict spectrum and as a part of broader nationally owned strategies to promote sustainable peace and development. The culture of conflict prevention and conflict resolution approaches that are now taking root in the United Nations system must be further developed alongside with more effective peacekeeping and peace building. Mr. President, it's been 15 years since the adoption of the landmark Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. Yet, the impacts of conflict on women and children are still inordinate, and their engagement in peace processes is still insufficient. Greater equality is a natural precondition for sustainable development, stability, and peace. As Kofi Annan said, I quote, "When women thrive, all of society benefits, and succeeding generations are given a better start in life," end quote. The presence of women negotiators in high-profile United Nations peace and mediation processes, role of women deployed by the United Nations to major conflict zones and high-stake interstate negotiations, as well as in peacekeeping and peace-building in general, is irreplaceable and should continue to grow. Mr. President, international terrorism and its most violent forms are an increasingly alarming threat to global peace and security and have become more diverse and fragmented over the recent years. Slovakia strongly condemns all terrorist acts as criminal and unjustifiable. No terrorist act should be left without adequate response of the international community. No perpetrators should be left unpunished, and no movement affiliated to any form of terrorism should be tolerated. The United Nations has done much to set standards in the fight against international terrorism and to encourage and help the member states to meet them. The 10th anniversary of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy in 2016 shall provide us with an opportunity to make our efforts in this struggle more efficient. It should be carried out in a multilaterally coordinated manner with full respect for human rights